Hey there, everybody. Thanks for being with me again. I hope you're doing well. I have a bit of a challenge in front of me today. How can I create a video, a hopefully relaxing video, hopefully ASMR triggering video, centered around a musical instrument, and not end up with a video that only musicians will enjoy or want to watch? That is the challenge today. First, let's introduce Exhibit A for your consideration. This is a Fender Precision Bass. It is one of two basses that I own. This bass was made in 1987, but I bought it from a person over the internet about 8 or 9 years ago, and it's been pretty much my number one musical companion since then. I'm in a band. We write and record and play our own music, and this has been the primary instrument that I've used in all of those performance and recording endeavors. But all that said, what can we do with it today that is not too technical or too musical? Well, one interesting thing about this bass that ties into the theme of the channel a little bit is the way it looks. The bass did not look like this when I bought it. One of the phrases in the title image of my channel is peaks at the past, and the way this bass looks right now is itself a peak at the past. Why is that? Well, because I'm a bit of a nostalgic guy and a bit of an old soul, and I always wanted a bass that looked like the way basses looked in the 1960s. And when I got this bass used, I said, I could dress it up like a bass from the 60s. I could buy all of the parts, they're still being made, and change the look of the bass so that it would look more vintage, more retro. And the result of what I did is what is before us now. So I thought maybe it would be fun and could also generate some interesting sounds if I led you on a little tour through the body of this precision bass, looking at the things that I changed to make it look like a bass that might have been sold in 1962. And as we talk about these pieces, we can talk about what they do, or in many cases, what they don't do. And that way we can approach Exhibit A here, not in a musical way, but in an aesthetic way, or in architectural design kind of a way, and then maybe that would be enjoyable to anyone with eyeballs instead of just people who know how to play music. So why don't we try that? So let me go through very quickly the pieces that I changed out to make this bass look more vintage. If you buy a Precision Bass today, it will have a body that is shaped like this, and it will have a volume and a tone knob and a jack right here, and it will have a pickguard, which is this curvy protective item here. But it won't have this finger rest, or as it was called back in the day, a tug bar. It won't have this piece of chrome over the pickup. And it won't have this piece of chrome over the bridge. These are all items that came stock and installed on the body back in the 60s, but they are not sold with basses today. Fender still makes all of these pieces, but frankly, they are obsolete. No one uses them, and they're really only cosmetic these days. So why don't we talk about them piece by piece, and I'll tell you what they're about and what they do or don't do, and why I put them on this bass and why I still use them. And why don't we start right here in the middle with this guy, this big chunk of chrome that draws your eye right to the middle of the bass. This is the pickup cover, so named because it covers the pickup, which is underneath. The pickup is the device that translates the motion of a string into an electrical signal that comes out the jack here and can be sent to an amplifier to make it heard in a band setting. So back in the 60s, why did they cover the pickup with a big chunk of chrome? Well, part of the reason is that back in the early 60s, they tried to put chrome on everything. It was a design aesthetic kind of a deal. Think about cars. I think car design and musical instrument design track very closely to each other. And back in the early 60s, when you think about cars, it's all about the chrome, right? And it was thought back in the day that apparently people would prefer to see a piece of chrome here in the middle of the bass than look at the pickup. Nowadays, thoughts have changed, and now any kind of guitar or bass that you see have the pickups completely exposed, and it's not a big deal. So let's have a little fun here and take this off so that we can uncover what the design minds at the time thought was so horribly ugly underneath this thing. that we'd be better off just covering it with a piece of chrome. That was funny. I hope you're prepared. There it is. That's the pickup. Pretty horrible, huh? Terribly ugly. Not really, of course. That is what the pickup cover was hiding from us. They don't use pickup covers now, partly because even back in the day, one of the very first things a player might do is take this pickup cover off the bass, throw it into the case, and never use it again. And there was a reason they did that, which we will talk about later when we're talking about this guy. You might be tempted to think that every single thing that they put on a musical instrument was to facilitate the production of sound, change that sound in some way. But the fact is that this piece right here was completely ornamental, completely driven by style and aesthetic. It didn't change the sound of the bass at all. But this was on basses in the early 60s, and so it's one of the pieces that I put on to help get me to a vintage look on this bass. The pickup cover. So let's set him aside. And let's move on to this guy. This piece of chrome covers the bridge, which is under here, and so it is appropriately called the bridge cover. Like I said before, this piece is still made by Fender, but it is made a little bit different than it used to be. Now, in its current configuration, as installed on this bass, it is also, like the pickup cover, completely ornamental. It doesn't do anything except sit there and look stylish. But the bridge cover that would have been on a bass in 1962 actually did perform a function. So if we take this one off, we can talk about how this one is different from the one that would have been on the bass back then. I apologize for some of these sounds might be a little intense. That's what happens when you can't find the screw. And one more. It's the loudest screwdriver ever. Okay, here we have a bridge cover. It covers the bridge. This is the bridge. This provides the anchor point for the 4 strings, and it also contains these little devices called saddles, which help you adjust the height of the string at the bridge, and also there's an adjustment that moves the saddle this way that lets you control the speaking length of the string and thereby control what's called the intonation. But that's all we're going to talk about there. And this was the bridge cover. Another bit of bling, 1960s bling, that covered up the bridge. But as you can see, this piece is nothing more than a chunk of metal. But the bridge cover from 1960, well, that era anyway, was not just this piece of metal. Attached to the inside of the bridge cover, back in those days, would have been a strip of what was essentially black foam rubber, very much like weather stripping that you would use on your front door to keep the draft out. And when the bridge cover was installed in place on the body, that strip of foam rubber right here would actually press into the strings, slightly deadening the sustain or the duration of the notes. The foam would partially mute the strings, and it was called a mute or a string mute. Why on earth would you want to do that? It's an electric bass. Why would you want to do anything that inhibited the duration or the sustain of those notes? And to answer that question, you kind of have to understand, you kind of have to jump back in time another decade to 1951 when the Precision Bass first hit the market, and you have to remember what bass instrument was the only bass instrument in jazz and orchestral music and dance music at that time, and that was the upright acoustic bass. And the notes on an upright acoustic bass are a little more attacky, a little more percussive, and a little less sustainy, pardon my amazing adjectives, than the notes on an electric bass. I don't know if we can experiment here with one of these strings by plucking it a little harder. But when you consider that as long as this string is vibrating through the magnetic field of this pickup, there is a current being sent to an amplifier. So you can hear this note for a long, long time. But the instrument that the electric bass was trying to replace in popular music, the upright bass, didn't sound like that. And so the thought was, well, the mute would help to make the notes a little more thumpy and a little less long and more approximate the acoustic upright bass sound. Now, if the player, of course, wasn't interested in having all of their notes muted all of the time, they would do what I said before, take this thing off the bass, throw it in the case, and never use it again. But sometimes a player will still want the sound of that slightly muted tone. A lot of Motown songs feature that slightly muted, a little more thumpy, a little more tubby kind of a precision bass tone. And a lot of pros will replicate that sound temporarily with a simple piece of sponge like this. Especially if you're a session bassist or a bassist in a cover band where you're playing, 3-4 hours of music a night, and some of that music might be classic 60s music. A guy like that might actually carry a sponge in their case, and you can use it temporarily to mute the strings. You would do it like this. You just have your sponge. There, you don't have your bridge cover in place. You just stick the sponge underneath the strings like this. If I can do it smoothly on the video. Like so, and then move it back as far as it'll go. Like so. Apologies again. The bass sometimes makes some noises as if it is complaining. See how the tone of those notes is different than the long note that we played a few minutes ago? Now this would sound a lot better through an amplifier, of course, but you get the idea of how a player would use a simple sponge to replicate that muted character. And then when they were done playing their chunk of 60s Motown songs, they would just pull that right out, right in between songs, and continue on playing with the more modern, longer sustained notes. So that's the story of the bridge cover and the mute that it used to have. We'll pause for a moment to talk about this pickguard. It's called a pickguard. The idea is if you're playing with a pick, which I don't do, I'm a fingerstyle player, but if you were playing with a pick, especially if you're playing aggressively, your pick would hit the body of the bass all the time, and the pickguard is placed on top of the body not only to protect the body, the wood, but also to cover up any sort of electronics cavities that are in the instrument. And in the precision bass, the cavity is pretty large because the body is routed out all through here where the pickups are, and the route extends all the way through here to make room for the volume and tone knobs and the wiring that goes between the two. The electronics are all attached to the back side of this pickguard. Now, when I bought this bass 8 or 9 years ago, it had a black pickguard on it, but nothing screams classic early 60s guitar or bass more than a tortoiseshell pickguard. So I had to buy a tortoiseshell pickguard to replace the black one, and that's what you see here. Fender actually made this pickguard, and they call it the 62 reissue pickguard. So just trying to dial up the vintage flavor any way I could, so I replaced this pickguard as well. Actually, I even replaced this pickup with a 62 reissue pickup, which is supposed to have the same kind of sound characteristics of an original pickup from those days. So that brings us to our last item, this guy. It's called a finger rest, or sometimes called a tug bar. Now, if you've ever seen a contemporary bass player play a bass, you've probably seen them put their thumb right here, right on the edge of the pickup, and play with their fingers. Like that. So why would something way down here below the strings, called a finger rest, how would that aid in the playing of the bass when you're playing from up here? Well, this is another design artifact left over from the early days of electric bass. You got to remember that before the Precision Bass, there was no commercially successful, mass-produced electric bass. This was the first one. Everything before it was upright bass. So when Leo Fender was playing around with these designs about how to make a bass that was worn like a guitar, a question up for debate was, how would players actually play this thing? And the consensus they came to was that, most likely, players would play with downstrokes of their thumb. And this finger rest was thought to be a place where players could hook their fingers like this and play with downstrokes of their thumb. Sorry for that noise. That is what led to its other nickname, Tug Bar. The idea is you're tugging on this bar to create counter leverage against your thumb that was doing the downstrokes. And players might have played like this for a while just because, that was the thinking at the time. That was what the tug bar was put there for. But these same players that immediately threw away their pickup cover probably discovered pretty early on, especially since you played an upright bass with your fingers, not your thumb, that it was more convenient to plant or anchor your thumb in a convenient spot like the edge of the pickup cover here, pickup case, this little guy here, and play up and down with your fingers like this. So the placement of this guy here was the result of a of design speculation, you might say. But in the real world, players decided that that really wasn't the way they were going to play the bass. And Fender eventually moved the placement of this in 1974, I think, to here, somewhere around here, on the upper side of the pickguard, so that players could anchor their thumb right here and play. That was a reaction, a change in the design as a reaction to the playing realities out there in the world. But of course, like I said, nowadays, basses don't even come with this item anymore, which got renamed a thumb rest when it got moved to this part of the bass. Fender still makes it, but it doesn't come installed on your standard precision production bass anymore. Those are the items that I replaced on this bass to give it a more vintage look. I have a vintage aesthetic, I guess, a nostalgic disposition, you might say. And it was a lot of fun to take this used bass and kind of make it my guinea pig for dressing up like a bass from the 60s. Once I got past the queasiness about drilling holes into an instrument that I owned, I had never done that before. But once I got over that, I've been very, very happy since playing a bass that looks like it came from that era. I'll get questions on it from time to time. It seems to draw attention at gigs sometimes, and of course the chrome always pops under stage lighting, as you can imagine. I really hope that you've gotten a little bit of a kick out of this short tour of the body of a Fender Precision Bass. And I hope it wasn't too detailed, and I hope you enjoyed some of these sounds. I shot a version of this video before that I had to scrap just because I was so clumsily maneuvering around this body that I was clanging and banging and making all sorts of sounds that would have been a little too much for the video, but it showed me that the body of a bass like this is a literal playground of sounds, combinations of metal and plastics, flat surfaces and edges and corners. I think I could do a whole sounds video just based around the body of this bass. But for today, I just wanted to take you on a quick peek at the past. A quick peek at what the Fender Precision Bass used to look like. And why it doesn't look like that anymore. And I hope you had a good time. thanks to all of you who have checked out my very small channel and some of my videos. And thanks especially to those of you who have subbed and who have left very kind comments. They're most appreciated. This is a very small, humble, creative space for me in a microscopic corner of the internet, and I really appreciate it when anybody finds me out here and has a kind word to say about what I'm doing. So please know that every single comment matters a lot, and please never hesitate to get in touch if you have any questions or want to share your own nostalgia about something from the past. Until next time, happy holidays. Christmas is coming up. Remember to spread light and positivity as much as you can and treat each other well. And we'll see you in the next video. Take care. Bye-bye.